Hey friend, today I want to just take a quick look at a short video from Frank Turek, the Christian apologist. I was on Twitter and this video came across my feed, so I watched it and I spotted several issues that I had with it within the space of about a minute and 25 seconds. Now, I have nothing against Frank Turek, and I think he's a sharp guy, and I know his ministry has helped a lot of people overcome their doubts and obstacles. And in fact, I actually bought his book when I first got into apologetics, but often atheists who are somewhat sophisticated will actually use Frank and a lot of the things that he posts as examples of being overly confident in your answers, but not really fully understanding what you are saying. So I think as apologists, if it's not going to hurt our witness and our ability to defend the faith, we need to actually hold each other somewhat accountable for the ways in which we fall short or don't really think things through fully before we say post a video that's going to go out to thousands and thousands of people. Not to say people are perfect, but this is a good exercise for us to take a look and see what we find, and hopefully that'll prevent you from falling into these sort of pitfalls in your apologetics journey. So let's take a look at the clip and then I'll go ahead and stop and start as needed.
How can you prove that free will actually exists?
How can you prove it actually exists?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's self-evident it actually exists, and any attempt to prove it...
Okay, right away, he thinks it's self-evident that free will exists. Now, it may just be a particular bias we have that it feels like we do things freely. That is, when I pick up my phone, it feels like I did that freely. Nothing was forcing me to make the choice. But that is a bias of how things ordinarily happen that upon further reflection may prove to be false. And so what often seems self-evident actually isn't self-evident. That is, once you really start reflecting on the nature of free will, especially in light of whether or not causal determinism is true, it quickly becomes apparent that it's not self-evident that we have free will. And there's a massive history of philosophers and thinkers going back and forth on whether free will is compatible with causal determinism, and if it is or isn't, if it's not, whether or not we have genuine free will, or we're hard determinists because everything is causally determined. So right away, it's just important to note that even though Frank thinks it's self-evident, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true that it is self-evident that we have free will.
Would have to assume it. Because if you're going to run some sort of experiment or survey, you have to assume you have free will in order to run the experiment or survey and not just be blindly guided by the laws of physics. This is why, in principle, no one will ever be able to prove that materialism's true.
Okay, so he seems to have made the mistake of level confusion. So in order for you as the investigator, let's say, into the nature of free will, you don't have to assume you have the phenomena in question in order for you to evaluate the phenomena.
Because in order to prove materialism's true, you'd have to be a scientist who has the free will to follow the evidence where it leads, but that's exactly what materialism denies.
Now, Frank seems to be addressing materialism in some way that is problematically confusing it with hard determinism. So materialism, as I understand it, just says that ultimately what exists is at the fundamental level is just matter. And there's nothing extra material that is counted as part of what exists. The ontology of the universe is ultimately material. Now, that's very different from saying that the material of the universe, the fundamental stuff of the universe is material, and if causal determinism is true, then it can be the case that we have free will. And you might think, well, if causal determinism is true, then we don't have free will. So you'd be an incompatibilist. Free will is incompatible with causal determinism. And you believe that determinism is true. So in that regard, then materialism then would be the sort of thing, if that's how you're thinking of it, materialism entails hard determinism or something. Yeah, you have to deny materialism in order to freely perform the experiment or something like that. But actually, you could be a materialist and be a compatibilist, or you could be a materialist and think that we have libertarian free will. That is, free will exists even though it's incompatible with causal determinism. Causal determinism is false. And we have what's often called significant freedom or libertarian freedom. And yet the fundamental stuff of the universe is not spiritual. It's just ultimately material. So Frank suffers from theory confusion here. Materialism isn't equal to or doesn't necessarily entail hard determinism.
Right. But how can you say that you're not the one that's not controlling your desires? Like, they're on a cellular level.
Is it possible that everybody in this room and everybody outside this room is in the matrix? And that we are experiments of some crazy scientist way out there somewhere? Yeah, that's possible. There's no way of disproving that. But I just choose to believe that that's silly.
Okay, now this is the glib sort of comments that give apologists a bad reputation and a bad name. This poor girl, she asked a legit question about the molecular level, and how you would know that that's not doing the work. That is, like, we're determined at the cellular level biologically to do what we do. And perhaps you could couple that with the laws of nature and the state of our body and the universe determining uniquely a one particular future, which is what it means for the future to be causally determined or for causal determinism to hold. And instead, he brings in external world skepticism, the matrix. And I mean, trying to be super charitable to Frank, you could say, well, he's trying to show just because this is a remote, far out possibility, like it's possible we don't have free will, but that's just silly because it's self-evident we have free will. And you thinking that we don't, going into this whole cellular level or materialism thing, that actually is like trying to prove that you can have knowledge of the external world using your senses, when the problem with that would be that instead he doesn't get this sophisticated. He just says, well, that's silly. He just disregards it. But this is really a non sequitur. Like, what does this have to do with answering her question? And again, saying that somehow regarding external world skepticism as true is silly itself, because when you look at the history of Western thought and philosophy, I mean, it is just riddled with important thinkers, the greatest minds in history, wrestling with the question of whether we can have knowledge of things outside our mind. And so this glib sort of, with a little hee hee ha ha, is again what gives apologists sort of a bad rap. So this is a non sequitur. It didn't answer her question. If anything, it dismissed it and minimized it. And she asked a really interesting question. And so I hope we can hold each other as Christian apologists to a higher standard. That's the goal of Apologetics University. Not because I've got it all figured out or I'm all great, but I just noticed there's a lot of things floating around in the pop apologetic sphere that is just not really well thought out and philosophically informed. So I hope we bring that to the table, and I hope you got something out of this video. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.